Meta's director of AI safety, who turned on OpenClaw, right, this personal assistant set of AI agents, and she instructed it to help organize her work email box, her work inbox. And it decided to delete all of the emails out of her work inbox. So, it's hard to figure out, if you give something like these instructions, how is it going to interpret those instructions if you're not clear enough? And then if it makes a mistake, is there a way for you to sort of undo those mistakes, keep it within bounds? That's definitely going to be one of the challenges. But there are ways to make it at least more secure.
Hello everyone, this is your host Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. We have another great guest with us today. Before I announce him, please hit the like and subscribe button. It allows us to keep bringing you this great content and bringing you world-class guests like we have today. So we would appreciate the love. So without further delay, I'd love to introduce to you Filip Verloy. He is hailing from Europe. He is a technology leader, has over 25 years of experience in the field across enterprise IT with consulting and global vendors. He is an expert at Agentic AI. What a timely conversation this is going to be. He's worked in some very large-scale complex environment. He served as the Global Field CTO at the API security startup Noname Security. He's held senior architecture and solution roles at Citrix, at Dell, at Riverbed, and VMware, to name a few. He's known for his curiosity and commitment to understanding the fundamentals behind technology. Filip challenges the illusion of knowledge. I'm going to want to learn a lot more about that and focus on building secure, resilient systems from first principles. Filip, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us so late in your part of the world.
My pleasure, Manoj. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
So give us a little bit about your background. What brought you into this wonderful field that we're all in now?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I've been doing this for quite a long time. It's over 27 years now, I would say. Okay. So I started in the late 90s, was my first IT role. My background is actually in electrical engineering. So I did a stint at Sony Electronics for a while, and then got convinced by a customer of theirs to join their operation in setting up a new electronics firm. That didn't last long. That company went bankrupt, and that sort of informed my opinion about companies for the long run. But yeah, so I kind of was figuring out what's an interesting field to jump into, and I've always been interested in like IT in general. Started as a gamer, like many of us, I would assume, and I took my first sort of IT role as a Sun Solaris architect, late 90s, early 2000s. Been working in infrastructure, been working in storage, been working in networking. Somehow ended up with my first vendor role with Citrix Systems on the networking side. Then worked at Riverbed, worked at VMware, Dell, and I've been at Rubrik now for almost 10 years. Very happy to still be here. And Rubrik has, like myself, also expanded in lots of different areas and went from a data management backup company to now doing a lot of agentic AI security. So it's been good for me to have this broad experience, I would say, across infrastructure, networking, and security, and that's come in handy in this exciting new world of agentic AI, for sure.
That's a very interesting background. And it's really interesting you brought up, when I thought of Rubrik, I was thinking backup. I really was. I mean, we've known them for backup. I had no idea they had ventured into this world of agentic AI. And there's a couple questions around that I want to ask. But before we get there, I'd love to understand, you use the phrase illusion of knowledge and building resilient systems from first principles. If you could explain to our audience, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I do think it's important to, like, when you're trying to build a system that's supposed to scale and is supposed to, be survivable in an organization, and it doesn't matter if it's like a super large scale enterprise or if it's an SMB, like that, the goal really is to build something for the ages, right? And to do that is to sort of try and take a step back from hype and from all of the stuff that you see happening on social and all of these amazing posts on LinkedIn about how cool and wonderful all of these new technologies, and really try to understand, what's the goal that we're building for here as a company, like what's going to be the contributing factor to us as an organization, and then try to understand how can we use some of that fundamental technology to, better ourselves, to like improve, improve our organization. And that often means, not being swayed by what's the latest and greatest new thing, but really understanding how do these things fit together. Like if you think about agentic AI, not to belabor the point and always jump to agentic AI, but it underneath that you do need a lot of fundamental knowledge about those underlying systems for you to basically understand what's really going on. So I always think it's important to, maybe take a step back, turn down the social media rhetoric for just a second, and try to understand how are these things built from the ground up, and what do I need to know fundamentally to make it work for me.
So, a lot of people in the industry will say start with understanding your risk. I'm sure you've heard that a trillion billion times, if that's a number. But and how do they, is that the place to begin, or are you saying begin with a fundamental understanding of your business and the underpinnings of the technological enablement and then look at risk? Like, what is the cycle there? How should people evaluate it? Because I think there's a lot of noise on this topic and people don't understand it very well.
So risk is an interesting one in the age of AI and especially agentic AI, right? So if you think about, you have sort of known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And I think in the world of agentic AI, there is a lot of unknown unknowns, right? So people are still very much experimenting with a lot of these use cases. So fairly recently, we had this like Claude bot, Mold bot, OpenClaw thing that everybody sort of jumped on and like built a personal assistant on their local machine that, could lead to great productivity enhancements and so on, but also expose them to a lot of risk that was previously unknown to them. So if you start from a risk perspective, which is probably a good idea as a company, but you need to have some fundamental idea of what am I actually talking about here, because you're probably not going to be able to map a risk in a way that makes sense if you're talking about these sort of unknown unknowns that happen to pop up very much so still in things like agentic AI. But starting from risk in general, I do feel is a good way to think about things. So the idea would be, what does this mean for my specific business? How can we map risk? What is the risk that we're willing to accept? Right? It's a fact of life that you're never going to be able to fix all vulnerabilities in an environment, for example. You're going to have to accept some of the risk and sort of understand that's sort of the cost of doing business, and then focus on what can you control and start from there. But I do think AI and agentic AI specifically is turning that on its head a little bit. So it's going to become a bit more difficult before it gets easier, is sort of my point of view on this in the next couple of months and years.
Yeah, as you have very accurately said, there are a lot of unknown unknowns in the world of agentic AI. And that's really at the pinnacle of that pyramid of pain, which any cybersecurity practitioner is probably familiar with. But when you look at agentic AI, do you think it naturally, as a construct, increases the attack surface, or does it have the possibility of actually reducing the attack surface?
Very interesting point. probably both from a theoretical perspective, but I do feel like initially it will increase the attack surface for sure. Where it will decrease the attack surface is this concept of fighting AI with AI, right? So for example, just recently we had this whole thing about cloud security being able to replace static application security testing, for example. Like you take this more generalized AI system like an LLM, and it happens to be extremely good in figuring out what are the security vulnerabilities in your code. So from that narrow lens, it can decrease your risk. But I think from a more broader perspective and a more realistic perspective, your attack surface is definitely increasing when you're adopting AI and agentic AI specifically. One example could be if you think about a traditional software solution versus, for example, a chatbot, like not even agentic AI, but just a general chatbot. With a traditional software solution, the architect building the application has sort of tight control over what the user can do, right? The input and output of the application is controlled maybe through a graphical user interface, let's say. They're sort of limited in how they can interact with the application. But with a chatbot, there is no such limit. You can talk to the chatbot, and if you're able to figure out how to, do things like a prompt injection attack using a text-based system, then you can go out of the bounds of what the architect intended to build. And it's very hard to control that part of the attack surface, right? So we are definitely broadening the scope there a little bit. And then, of course, not only that, with AI and agentic AI, we're introducing this very untrustworthy partner, which is an LLM, right? Which is a non-deterministic part of the software stack, which is, you're unable to sort of predict what it's going to do. And you're handing over, to some extent, the keys to drive the car to the LLM to make some decisions on your behalf, which you are going to have difficulties, keeping within bounds. So from that point of view, definitely the attack surface is expanding, but there is definitely also an opportunity to use AI to steer AI and to shrink the attack surface. So I would say both.
That's a really cool explanation. Several questions along those lines then. When you look at agentic AI, and you mentioned rightfully so that it is very much a probabilistic outcome. It's not a deterministic outcome with it, right? And LLMs inherently are probabilistic, if I said that right. They're not deterministic. I mean, every single time you ask it, you could get a different result. Have you, in your experience, seen how much in line with human thought or a human choice selection is an agent-based system versus something that is deterministically programmed by a traditional software engineer?
Yeah, so I think the way to approach this is we don't really know how the LLM operates, right? So that's why we keep saying like an LLM is like a black box. But we do have the ability to sort of provide guardrails around the LLM externally. There's, of course, a lot that you can do from a training perspective that sort of guides, quote unquote, the persona of the LLM. If you think about it, an LLM is fundamentally just trying to produce the next reasonable continuation of a text that you're giving it. And the way that it does that is based on its training corpus. Like it's read billions and billions of web pages. It got access to all of these books, legally or illegally, that's debatable. But it has this entire body of knowledge, and we've given it that body of knowledge, right? So ultimately you could claim that, it's making these decisions or predictions based on a knowledge base that was given to it by us, right? So it took, it fed our knowledge into the system, and that's sort of what it uses to make this next token prediction, if you will. And then, of course, there's ways in which you can, tune what the model will do, like there's temperature tuning, et cetera, to make it more, more predictable, more realistic, or more creative, whatever that you want to do. And then you have this thing that you have difficulty controlling, and you're putting that in charge of an agent then. So you're sort of taking this brain and you're giving it access to tools, and you're giving it access to data, and you're letting it call APIs. So you're basically taking this brain and you're giving it arms and limbs and allowing it to roam around your organization. So you better come up with a way to do that securely, right? So that's going to be probably the next challenge there.
Can you even do it securely, though?
I mean, there are definitely examples, even in the last couple of weeks, of things going, very, very wrong, right? So, and of course, things going wrong, you'll see as news stories pop up. Things going right, they're less interesting, so you won't see them as news stories, I guess. So there's a little bit of self-selection going on there, but we recently had this story, for example, of Meta's director of AI safety who turned on OpenClaw, right, this personal assistant set of AI agents, and she instructed it to help organize her work email box, her work inbox, and it decided to delete all of the emails out of her work inbox. So it's hard to figure out, if you give something like these instructions, how is it going to interpret those instructions if you're not clear enough, and then if it makes a mistake, is there a way for you to sort of undo those mistakes, keep it within bounds? That's definitely going to be one of the challenges. But there are ways to make it at least more secure, guardrails, right? So all of these AI foundation companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, they all provide some sort of guardrailing system that can help you steer the model in a more acceptable manner. And then there's other things that you can use, stuff that my company is working on as well, to make deploying these systems more secure. But we're definitely in the early stages of figuring out how can we adopt this at scale.
See, if you were as an example, I'll just pick on a use case here. You create an agent that replaces the travel desk at your company. So now you tell it that you guys are all going to a conference, as a hypothetical, and it needs to go and find the best hotels and airline ticket combinations for the team. Now, if you think about it, when you give that task to a human, you're also going to give them the names of the people, their dates of birth, because that's required as part of the reservation, as part of the TSA checking on an airline. You're going to give them you're going to give that human a credit card number that they can. You're going to give them addresses for those people. There's a lot of PII, personally identifiable information, in what people would say, well, that's a fairly simple transaction and a great use case for agentic AI. Just making this up, Philip, right?
Yeah.
Now, in that, when you give it all that data, you have no way to get that data back. It's now a part of it, right? And how it chooses then, first of all, I'm sure maybe there's guardrails here, but can that data then be used by the broader LLM in other places? And or is there a way for it to force it to forget that information? Or is it going to unreasonably share that data with a lot of other sites that you don't know their security of, and now you've lost control of that? Because normally people will go to, as an example, American Express or Expedia or someplace that has some consciousness of security. But if your instruction to it is get me the cheapest, fastest, best put together, that might come from a totally different unknown place or a different method of access that it figures out, and it makes the reservation. How would you secure that? I mean, how can you really secure something like that?
Yeah, definitely a good thought experiment, and there's many things going on, right? So if we look at this from the point of view of an agent, typically what the agent does is you ask it something. So let's assume it's a chatbot, like you say, you're trying to book the cheapest flight or something. So you give it an instruction, and what the agent always tries to do is it wants to front load all of the context gathering, right? So it wants to understand what is the stuff that I need to be able to perform this task as you've instructed it to do. Like if you just say, book me the cheapest flight for my team, it needs to figure out what is the team, what are the dates of birth of the team members, et cetera, et cetera. So it needs to front load that context somehow. Typically what happens with an agent is you have the context, right? You have the context window in which it needs to store this temporary data for it to do its job. Normally that context doesn't, become part of its long-term data set, right? It's just its temporary memory. So normally that shouldn't happen. Well, we all know in security, like, theoretically, normally, and what happens in practice are different things.
Exactly.
But that shouldn't happen. But if we sort of start from the beginning, typically, even if you train an LLM, you want to train the LLM on non-PII data, right? You do not want to have any personally identifiable information as part of that training corpus. So that's where it already starts, by filtering out any PII data. So you're not using that to train the model. And there's technologies to do that, like data security posture management, for example, comes to mind, where you sort of make sure that the training corpus data set is clean of anything that you do not want in there. And it could be PII, but it could also be, data that leads the model to, think in a certain bias that you don't want in there, right? So you filter that data out of there, and then you come to an LLM which doesn't contain that data, so it can't leak that data. Then what happened over time is we said, well, the LLM doesn't know anything about me, doesn't know anything about my company, so we need to feed it that information. And we came up with several technologies to do that, like retrieval augmented generation was one of them, whereby you said, I'm going to feed it all of my company data. I'm going to vectorize my company data in a vector database, and then the LLM can figure out, is this question related to something that I know from the vector database, i.e. the data of the company, and can I answer the question more specifically for you? And that, of course, could contain a lot of PII information. So again, there you should filter out that data, right? So data filtering, data masking there should happen. So that data filtering, that data masking is sort of the technique that you would use there. From an agent perspective, we need to make sure that the temporary context, the memory as we call it, and the memory can be a cache plus RAG, is flushed, is filtered out after each interaction. And it's not only useful from a security perspective, it's actually needed if you think about how an agent works. So if you go to a normal chatbot, let's say Gemini, the way that you should use it is every time you want to ask it about something specific, you should start a new chat and not continue your previous chat. And the reason you should do that is otherwise it will use that context of that previous chat to try and to try and continue the conversation. So that would be the recommendation, is make sure you get rid of all of those cached chats on a continuous basis, so it can always start fresh. Now, the data is going to be there, right? So at some point, you'll have to build the system in such a way that it doesn't accept PII information. So there's ways to do that. Like if you want to call it an AI DLP system or an AI firewall, there's many techniques and technologies that will allow you to do that, even inline, where you try to say, I'm going to upload my passport number because the agent asked me to do so. And the system could then say, I'm sorry, but you're trying to upload PII. That's not allowed. So there are definitely ways to secure that. Is it easy and straightforward? I think my long-winded answer demonstrated that it's not, but that's sort of where we are at the moment.
Oh, well, If we went one step further in that thought experiment and said, you know what, we're really going to automate this and we're going to give it access to our HR so it can get the employee name and all the data directly from there. I guess where that's leading is the agent at that point, to me, becomes an identity. It becomes, quote unquote, another human. If you, I'm maybe not using the right words, but that's how I'm thinking of it. It becomes another persona.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on, or how do you manage agentic identity then? Is it an identity, or I'll shut up, I'll listen to it. What does an expert have to say about that? And
Yeah, so this is a super interesting part of the conversation today, right? So how do we deal with IAM in this world of agentic AI? And there was this super interesting post a few days ago by the CISO of Rivian on LinkedIn that sort of came out and said, like, look, we've been looking at this. How can we use this? And according to me, is what he said is like, this is not a solved problem. Like, we have to really think through what do we need to change in our existing workflow in order to fix that? And the reason that is to your point, if you think about an agent, you can potentially assign that agent an identity, right? So if you look at Microsoft, for example, they now have something called Entra Agent ID, where they want to assign like an identity to the user, just like they would assign to a normal user. The same conversation we're seeing, like when we talk to customers, some of our customers, they say, we are actually assigning like badges to AI agents. We are treating them as if they were employees because essentially that's what they're becoming in the environment, and we need to give them permissions, trace what they can do, and so on. Well, the problem is though, an agent might have a starting identity, but then depending on the agentic pattern, things become very, very opaque. And what I mean by that is if you have an agent, single agent, and the agent has access to tools and data, then you can assign an identity to the agent and you can see what the agent is doing with the tools, the API calls, and what data it's accessing. I think that's very straightforward. That line is easy to make. But if you have a more complex pattern, which, in production is typically what it looks like, you have sub agents, right? You have a coordinating agent that you've called with your identity. That coordinating agent might have an identity. Then it's calling a sub agent to perform a certain subtask. That sub agent needs temporary access to a data set, the HR database, as you described it, to pull some information out of there. That access should not be static. That access should be context aware based on what the agent needs to do in a particular point in time. We have no way to configure that today, really.
wow,
So typically what happens is we give this, long-term token-based access to these systems, and then whatever calls the sub-agent or the sub-sub-agent works on the basis of that long-living access that they have to that database. Well, maybe today it's agent A calling the sub-agent, and maybe tomorrow it's agent B calling that sub-agent. Who was really responsible if something goes wrong now in that case? So I think it's definitely a longer conversation in terms of technology changes that will need to happen for us to think through this entire workflow end to end. And it's not something that's, solved with the stack that we have today. It definitely can be, because we have systems whereby we have full traceability end to end, but that is not how companies implement identity today. So there is definitely a gap that we need to address from a technology perspective.
That is brilliant. That is a serious gap, and it's one I had not thought of it that way. To assign identities dynamically based on context. I don't know of a mechanism that can do that today. Today, you are absolutely correct. We assign it we give a static identity that's tokenized, and that's it. But in the world of agentic AI, ideally, what you're saying is exactly what should happen. It should be dynamic. That identity is only assigned based on context for that given task at that moment, and then it's removed. Very complex issue, actually. I mean, are you guys working on solving that, Philip?
I definitely have some thoughts about that. Not concrete solutions that I'm able to share today, but we are definitely working on something in this area. I think step one will be visibility, right? To trace what's going on and show the customer exactly like what does the flow look like, what identities that you have assigned, and if it's actual identities in an IDP or if it's using some sort of token based access, at least giving you that visibility of what happened. That will already go a long way in terms of if something goes wrong, at least you have traceability, you have observability, you can go back and figure out what happened. But the actual longer term solve, I definitely have some ideas, but I would say watch this space. more needs to happen there.
Well, yeah, please keep us in the know when you're able to. But that's a very good thought as to how we do it. And right now, at least I personally don't know of a good mechanism of action for that. It's a very complicated problem. So where does API security and API access all fit into this agentic AI world? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think API security is something that under the covers, that's the way these systems operate, right? But it's maybe not universally well understood. Also, even from a security perspective, like if we talk to customers, even if we talk to very mature security teams within an organization, they might or they might not have tooling that allows them to understand like what does my API attack surface look like. And the reason that's important in agentic workflows and in AI agents is that's how the agent operates, right? So you ask the agent to perform a task. The agent needs some sort of access to a tool, to a piece of data, and to get there, it needs to call an API. Maybe it's a direct API call. Maybe it's an abstraction on the basis of an MCP proxy or something like that. Today doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it's an API, let's say. So this is becoming really, really important in terms of, well, what does that abstraction do? Because if you have good abstractions, they are super clear, super well documented. This is what the API will allow. This is what the API expects. This is how the API operates. But usually APIs leak abstractions, right? So there's ways to get more out of the API than the developer was intending to, and so on. And that means in the world of agents, that's becoming a security risk again. There's a potential gap there. So it's definitely something we need to have a close look at in terms of what is possible there. So definitely an area of the attack surface that we need to secure. So I've worked for an API security startup for a while, and I think we might have been just a few years too early with our solution at that point. But yeah, it's coming back with a vengeance, I would say, now in the world of AI agents. If you just think about any modern software application today, is typically a distributed application, right? It's calling multiple distributed systems.
Yes.
And those distributed systems are interconnected on the basis of APIs today. So that piece of the puzzle, to understand that, and that's also what I mean by thinking through this from first principles, is how is it really built? That's something that you're gonna have to understand if you want to make sure that doesn't turn into, in this case, it's a known unknown because we know about it, but still you're gonna want to be able to secure that.
So this runs into direct conflict with first principles, and that is going to be convenience. As we know, ideally, we want to think about security the way you're prescribing. We start with first principles, we go there. But typically, convenience wins over all of these things, and getting to market wins over all of these things. So with that statement being made, are we headed are we in a situation again where we're going to just basically roll out technology and adopt it, fully knowing that there's going to be all kinds of vulnerabilities that are associated with it, and we're just going to end up dealing with this at a later point in time? Is there any way to even avoid that scenario? And if there isn't, I think that's very dangerous, because with AI, the bad actors are getting very proficient with AI, and they're going to be able to exploit those at an even faster rate than what we have seen traditionally, which was human-based attacks. Your thoughts, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe it goes back to the human condition. I don't know. But if you think about OpenClaw, and I've used OpenClaw as an example a few times, but OpenClaw, the way that we all approached it is we had this YOLO moment, right? So we said, oh, let's just turn it on and see what happens. And unfortunately, I think, back to your question, I think we are marching in this direction of let's just turn things on. Let's just adopt these things and figure out how to secure them at a later stage, because convenience trumps, security in this case. Of course, we all know if you've been in security for a while, a little bit of friction is a very good thing, right? A little bit of friction pauses your thoughts and then allows you to think like, why do I need to do like MFA authentication for this thing? Or like, why are you making this so difficult to use? And it's because it's important, right? So I always give this example, and I'm sure everybody or a lot of people give this example about the reason you have brakes on a race car is not to slow down the race car. It's so that the race car can drive as fast as it can, right? Without brakes, it's definitely going to crash. But with brakes, it can drive as fast as it can possibly go, but it won't crash. But people don't like brakes. Is my experience. So we're going to have to figure out a way to make adopting security around AI agents as low friction as possible and make it part of, a standard rollout process. Fortunately, what I'm seeing is in a lot of companies, there's a sort of, maybe it's formal, maybe it's informal, a sort of AI governance committee, right? So there's people thinking about, this is what I would love for, like from a adoption perspective and what I'm willing to allow. You mentioned PII before, for example, like these are the golden rules for our specific organization. And maybe they even write it down on a piece of paper, like they create a Word document and they say, this is how we want things to operate in our environment. And luckily today we have the technology, because of LLMs, to take that description of an AI governance committee in natural language and pipe that into an LLM that can act as a judge, that can then secure the use of the actual application-based agents in a production environment. So back to your earlier point, like, is AI going to shrink or broaden the attack surface? There is an opportunity here with things like LLM as a judge to shrink the attack surface in a very, very easy way without introducing too much friction or too much, security controls or things that people perceive as too difficult to implement. And let's just go and figure out how to fix it tomorrow.
Let's take this theme of friction and go down a rabbit hole. And I'm going to ask you to kind of look into the future, if you have a crystal ball. With agentic AI, how is the model of consuming services over the internet likely to change? And why I say this is, if you think about it today, when I go, again, we'll stick to the thought experiment of booking travel, because why not? We can pick another one too if you want. But if we stuck with that, when I go to a website to book travel, I get all these advertisements and all this garbage that I really don't care about. But that is what's paying for that free experience, right? When I go to Agentic AI, I'm bypassing all that. I no longer have to deal with all that. I'm not going to see that. and those advertisers are never going to get their message in front of me. And this is going to happen everywhere we start creating these automated tasks where the computer is just dealing directly with an API, getting the data and completing the task. And we've built this entire infrastructure around, advertising and consumption. Do you have any insight as to what might happen here in the future? I know it's a bit of an unfair question, but I had to ask it.
No, I like the thought experiment again, but I think, of course, anybody who pretends to be able to predict the future is probably going to be wrong. But what I feel is going to happen is that there is a thought about monetization for these LLMs, right? So you already have companies like OpenAI thinking about, in certain subscription models, they're going to pipe in advertisement in the chatbot because somehow they need to monetize their services also from a consumer perspective. Like some of us are willing to pay, monthly subscriptions of 40, 100, 200 US dollars to use these systems. I'm definitely willing to do that. Maybe even if you're using like an open claw whereby you have an offline LLM running on your own system, you won't have to deal with that. What I think will happen, and this is very cynical of me, and this is my opinion, right? Just my opinion. But what I think will happen is that there will be an API that you can call. So the LLM API that you will call, which is the fast part and the slow part. And the slow part will pipe in advertisements through your chat interface. And the fast part won't pipe in advertisements through your chat interface. So I think over time, they have figured out a way to monetize this in a different way by forcing you to like maybe every half of page of answers that you get, there will be like a nice hint of advertisement there, unless you're willing to like fork over a couple of $100, and then you're on the fast API, the advertisement free API. Like ultimately, I think from a consumer point of view, you're either paying a subscription or they're going to figure out a way to pipe in advertisement in your UI. I think that's where we are as a society. Very cynical response, I know, but that's what I really think.
No, it's a very fair response. We'll see, because as people figure out that they can create these agents and they can go out there and do this, and they don't have to deal with that mess of data that's coming back at them trying to sell them something, I'm sure that's going to hurt certain providers of those services. And you're right, they'll figure it out some way, because it's an existential thing. But what happens with governance in this world then? Because you look at GDPR, which is big in your side of the planet, and Agentic AI, I think there's a bit of friction there between those two things.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because with human-based data sets, I can control it. Agentic AI, again, there's still limitations on the guardrails I can do here.
Yeah, no, 100%. So there's a lot of debate, as you can imagine, like in a lot of European countries, in how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this going forward? Like one of the things that's super, front of mind these days for a lot of European organizations is this concept of sovereign cloud, for example, whereby we want to disconnect from the large American-based cloud providers and like become sort of self-sustained and not share data. And this sort of falls into the same realm. So there's organizations in the EU building their own LLMs for usage in agentic AI that are following the EU AI Act, right? So in the EU AI Act, there's certain prescriptive regulation that, says certain parts, certain data can't be part of that LLM, which is very GDPR related as well. So those things will continue to happen. To a certain extent, it goes back to your point of, do we want convenience or do we want regulation in this case, or do we want governance in this case? So there's going to be two camps, right? There's going to be people who are more leaning towards we're going to use EU AI sanctioned LLM models in our agentic AI stack, and it's going to be a sovereign stack. It's going to be completely offline on premises. And there's people who are going to say like, no, the most powerful models, the stuff that will actually let me create agentic systems that add value to my organization, those are those, foundation models that I get from an OpenAI or an Anthropic and so on. We have others as well, sort of in between, like Mistral in France, for example, very popular down in my side of the pond. So those things are a little bit in friction with one another, and I think we'll see more regulation, definitely EU regulation, to try and more tightly control some of these things. In the UK, for example, there's already been a guidance note from the government on like agentic AI usage and what they would like to see. So that's just going to increase as people try to come to grips with how can we control these things better. The problem with these systems, even with GDPR, is always you have theoretical descriptions of what people want from a regulatory perspective, and then you have the reality of implementation, and those two things aren't always compatible with each other.
Correct.
So that's going to be that's going to lead to an environment like with GDPR today, whereby you have sort of paper adherence to GDPR, but in reality, you're sort of in a very grayish zone when it comes to those regulations. But yeah, what I foresee is the next couple of months, a lot more pressure coming from regulatory bodies to clamp down on some of these use cases.
Well, maybe they should rethink that, because so much of the data of an individual is out on the web now anyways. Like if you're a US citizen or anyone living in the United States, your address, your social security number, all those things are probably readily available on the dark web. In fact, I know they are. It's not even okay. Look at all the theft of data that's happened in government agencies across the world. There are so many people whose data is just out there, and it's never going to come back. It's never going to be under GDPR. It will never be under right to forget. So maybe there should be a more pragmatic approach taken to this, and realize, and I'm just going to say it, I think an individual should have some way to be able to change or solidify their governmental identity. And that has never been done. Like in the US, allow us to change our social security number. We can't do that right now. If that data is compromised, realize it's never going to come back. You cannot delete it. It's gone, right? And if it's causing real harm, you should be able to alter it, right? And so much of our infrastructure is built on these static concepts that we should really be rethinking that, instead of trying to fight this inevitable of what's coming. You can't stop a tsunami. That's my personal opinion, though. So
No, I think it's definitely a fair point, especially your point of like all of your data is probably out there already, right? Like we do a lot of dark web monitoring as well as part of some of the solutions that we provide, and yeah, like for $5 I can buy an identity with a valid session token and log into a lot of organizations today, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it's an interesting thought. The question, of course, is like the further we push into things like biometrics and so on, it becomes a really shady type of scenario, right? It's going to be hard to change your fingerprint and stuff. But yeah, I do agree. I do agree with the fact that we can't stop it. It's probably already too late, to your point. So we need a different way to think about this and to manage this for sure.
Well, Philip, we're already at an hour. This conversation went by way too quickly. Anything you would like to plug and tell our audience about?
If I look at what we are sort of working on, and I won't plug my company solution, that's not the point, but just to sort of add what I think could be an interesting idea when you talk about adopting these agentic systems, just like with anything in security, start with the basics, right? And the basics are visibility. Understand what are the agents that I have in my environment? What are the tools that I'm allowing those agents to use? On the basis of what identities am I doing that? What data am I exposing to those systems, and how can I control those things? So go back to the basics and make sure that that layer is something that you can control, and then enable your AI and enable your agentic AI on top of that. I think that's something that anybody can do, independent of size of organization. I think that's always a good starting point. So I would definitely start there.
Well, Filip, thank you so much for being here. It was an honor having you here. And if you have anything new as you develop some of your ideas and when you're able to share them, please let us know. Let our audience know.
Yeah, will do. Thanks a lot for the invite, Manoj. Really enjoyed the conversation.
I did as well. Thank you so much.